G'day, man. Hey, Rosie. How are you? Good to see you. Hello, all. Hey, how are you, mate? What are you all dressed up for? Oh, wow. Hey, guys. G'day. Audio level, testing 1, 2, 3. David Crisafulli, testing 1, 2, 3. All good? G'day, mate. How are you? Thanks, everybody. The youth crime explosion we've seen in the last week in Townsville is unprecedented, it's unacceptable, and it is terrorising Townsville. And enough is enough. I've just come from a meeting with the Mayor, and I want to thank her for her time, and this afternoon as well as tomorrow, thanks to Natalie and Dale, I'm going to be speaking with a number of victims of the youth crime crisis in this city. I'm going to be speaking with police at the front line, with people who provide services, but the cries for help are real. I've been actively following what is happening in this city, and I'm not sure we've seen an episode like this in a long time. Police cars being rammed every night. Police, the people who are charged with the responsibility of keeping the community safe, they're being hunted. We've got cars being burnt out. We've got a generation of untouchables who just have absolutely no fear, smashing into people's homes, taking the keys while they're there of a brand new car and torching it. This city is under siege, and we haven't heard peep from the government. So I'm here to let this community know that it matters, and youth crime is unacceptable. And a decision to water down the Youth Justice Act 8 years ago has created a generation of repeat hardcore offenders, and they know that their rights outweigh the rights of the victim, and it's got to change. It will change. And I'm determined to make sure that we rewrite the Youth Justice Act and we remove that provision of detention as a last resort. We've got to get serious about early intervention, and we need to make sure that that reversal of police numbers finally ends. There are 202 fewer police today than 12 months ago in the middle of a youth crime crisis. Fewer police, weaker laws. Is it any wonder youth crime is ripping a swathe through cities like Townsville? Yesterday I had a good conversation with the Police Commissioner at the Walk for Jack. I've been told that today the Commissioner has announced that there will be extra police numbers coming to this city. That is an excellent short-term fix. But boy, oh boy, there's a long way to go, starting with stronger laws and permanent police. And until we do that, we're going to keep on plugging holes. We're going to have a city held to ransom by a group of young crims who know that they are the untouchable generation. And this city has had enough. Queensland has had enough. The Mayor made some excellent points before, and I really want to thank her for her time. But the conversation that keeps going through my mind is the conversation of a shift worker who goes out and listens on her back patio before she goes to work in the morning to listen where the roars of the engines are to determine what route she takes to her job. When she gets to her work, she looks around and prays that she makes it in. We've had people assaulted with baseball bats in this city. Police cars rammed. The people charged with keeping the peace have become the target, and we haven't heard a peep from the government. Not a peep. And that's why I'm here. Because community safety is a priority for Queenslanders, and it's a priority for me. Over to you, Dale.
This community right now is in the middle of a living hell. And all the time that I've lived and worked in this community, I have never seen it so bad. I have never seen a situation where people were fearful of leaving their own homes. I'm being contacted by people who will not go out to do their grocery shopping for fear that they're going to be run over by a stolen motor vehicle. It is completely out of control. And instead of being up here and counting police numbers, this government's more focused in Brisbane on counting the numbers around the cabinet table to determine who's going to be the next leader of this state. And you have to ask the question, who is leading Queensland at the moment? Who's taking charge? Who's giving the directions and the orders? Who's making sure that our police have the resources, the support that they need to clean up this mess in this community? They are so busy protecting their own positions down in Brisbane that they've forgotten about the protection of our residents in this town. This community is fed up, make no mistake. My phone has been ringing red hot for the last week from this community, from members in this community who are absolutely fed up to the back teeth with what's going on. They've had enough, they've had a gutful. They want to see these young kids off the street, and they should be off the street. We talk about consequences for actions. Well, they need to be held to account for what they're doing, and if they're going to run around town in stolen vehicle convoys, ramming police vehicles, putting lives at risk, then they belong in jail, and I make no apologies for that. We need to clean up our streets. The Commissioner and the Minister needs to make sure that there are sufficient police to do the job. We know that our police are suffering from burnout. They're stressed. They never know one day to the next when they go out on patrol whether they're going to be rammed, and their lives are being put at risk. And that has to stop. And it has to stop today.
Good afternoon, my name's Natalie Marr, the LNP candidate for Thuringowa. I spent the weekend talking to a lot of the victims that have had to endure a siege of criminal activity, and one of the comments that I'm hearing from them is that they're hearing nothing from their local Labor ministers. And I want to thank David for being here today, because I phoned him to tell him what I'm hearing from my community, and he has come today to support me and the community to make sure that we get the help that we need. I have had to listen to people crying, the fear. They're not just scared anymore. We have a community that are terrified, and they've had enough. We need to tear up that Juvenile Justice Act and start from the beginning, and I'll tell you why. Because my community are telling me that they want to be heard. The victims of crime should be who we are thinking of when this act is rewritten. There needs to be consequences for actions, and we need these thugs off our street. That's what they want. They want these thugs to be locked up. They have had enough. Now, going around on the weekend and speaking to those that lost their car, had their businesses broken into and completely destroyed, we've had people killed, maimed, beaten. Our insurance policies are going through the roof, and we have absolute silence from the Labor members in this city. So please, just listen to the community. Make detention as a last resort removed from our Juvenile Justice Act, and do it now.
Over to you. Thanks, Ross. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I'll make 2 points. Firstly, crime fell during that period, and the statistics show that. But there's always more that we can do, and there's always more we should learn from. But it starts with making sure that the Youth Justice Act is fit for purpose, and the removal of detention as a last resort is a day one agenda item. I also want to get serious about early intervention, and I don't want to give up on that next generation of kids. So we've got a generation of that repeat hardcore offenders, and we've got to deal with them right in the here and now. They're the ones ramming police cars, they're the ones going into homes and with knives, they're the ones with baseball bats, and we've got to deal with them, we've got to take them off the streets. But we've also got that next cohort, that pipeline coming through, and because of 8 years of watered down laws and no consequences for actions, they're getting more and more bold, and there's getting more of them. The number of repeat offenders in this state has gone from 10% to 20% in barely more than a year. So that shows that what's happening at both ends of the spectrum aren't working. And I'm determined to make sure that we've got laws that are fit for purpose to deal with those hardcore repeat offenders. And I also want to get gold standard early intervention to make sure that we can give that next generation some hope to turn their lives around. We can always do better as community leaders. But youth crime did decrease during that period, in every metric. Well, I'll always look to do better, Rosie, but youth crime did improve over that time, and the laws were working. And the government's first decision was to water down the Youth Justice Act when they came to power. That's now 8 years ago. And on the back of it, you've got a generation of repeat young thugs. And every metric shows it. Over that period of time, stolen cars and break-and-enters fell, and it's increased year on year. And the figures are breaking people's hearts. Across the state, you've had a doubling in many of those offences, and you can feel it in people's emotions. I've got a lot of friends and family here, and I know what they're feeling, and you just heard it through Natalie's emotions. It's real and it's raw. And Dale was a police officer here for decades. And when he says that he's never felt it like this, I listen. And when the community tells me how much youth crime is ripping the soul out of this place, I listen. This is a proud city, and it's got a lot to be proud of. But right now, there's a generation that are just ripping the fabric out from under it. And I'm determined to make sure we do something about that. And I want people in this city, and indeed all across Queensland, to know that we are going to put their rights ahead of the rights of a generation of young crims. And we're going to do better with the next generation to make sure that that pipeline isn't coming through, to make sure that terror doesn't continue. And that's a priority for me. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. None have got the maximum penalty. None. And there's a provision in the Act that prevents that. We will listen to all options. But the day one agenda is to remove detention as a last resort. And if we do that, we unshackle the judiciary to do their job. When I hear Labor ministers putting their hands in the air and wondering why a hardcore repeat offender doesn't get a jail term, I point them to the section of the Act that they put back in 8 years ago that said detention must be a last resort. That is a broken policy. And that has been the single biggest factor that prevents a magistrate from being able to impose a jail term where it is appropriate. Now, I repeat what I said before. I'm not suggesting to you there's not a role for early intervention. You bet there is. And because of a failure in that space, you've got that pipeline that has doubled in barely over the last year of that repeat hardcore offenders. We've got to get serious about early intervention. But at the moment, with the hardcore repeat offenders, detention as a last resort is written in black and white, and it was put back in here by this government. And that's a failure. And that's the reason why that revolving door of the Broken Youth Justice Act goes round and round in circles. Everything's on the table when it comes to being the best when it comes to early intervention. And the Auditor-General is currently looking at the programs in Queensland and running the ruler over them. And I'm going to make some point. At the moment, the government, every time we raise this, says that they're spending a record amount of money on that early intervention. But they're never actually analysing what's working and what's not. So the first step we've got to do is work out what are those programs that are good and that are turning kids around, and how can we do more of them? And then look at the programs that aren't working and wonder how can we channel that money into doing what it should be doing. I'll give you an example of a program that's not getting much government funding right now, and it's a school called Men of Business. Now, I've been to that school and I've sat down and I've listened to those young men. And it's a school where kids who have no hope are given hope, and they're given love, and they're given support. And to see those young men transfer and go into employment is one of the most fulfilling things you'll see. Now, there are other programs like that. Now, that program receives next to no state government funding, other than the normal funding that it would as a school. That, to me, defies belief. They're the sort of programs you've got to pick up and roll out across the state. There are programs that work. There are programs that don't. And we've got to get serious about delivering gold standard early intervention. But I come back to the point. You've also got a here and now. And on the here and now, you have a generation of untouchables who have no consequences for their behaviour. And something's got to be done about that in the short term as well. It removes the very reason that a jail sentence isn't given, though. If the underlying principle is detention must only be used in the last resort, well then that's why the sentencing is never delivered to a community expectation. Now, we remain focused on listening to the community, and we're going to make sure that we put forward a suite of individual issues when it comes to things like that. But I just want to make it clear to people on day one, detention as a last resort will be removed immediately from the Youth Justice Act. Consequences for actions will be rewritten into the Youth Justice Act. And early intervention is going to be important, it's going to matter, and it's going to turn the next generation of young crims around. No, it will be removed as a sentencing provision. So that's right across the board. And I'm serious about that. And I shake my head that the government won't acknowledge that that was the seed that was sown that grew into the youth crime crisis. And on the back of it, you just have a generation who are doing what we are seeing on the streets of this city at the moment and elsewhere. And you know, look, I think Dale summed it up. The last period in this city has been the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. But I got a message just the other day from Harvey Bay, from our candidate there, telling me about a night of madness there with businesses smashed. It's happening across the state. And I want every Queenslander to know that making our community safer is a priority for me because it's a priority for them.
Surely though, on that stage, when they've got a child in there, often very hard to prove they were involved in dangerous operations or no.
Sure.
They might instead be charged with a more serious offence of abuse. You don't think though a magistrate is going to hand down or through the detention some of the physical punches to men's harm? That seems a bit unrealistic.
Well, it depends what the offence is and what the sentence is. And of course that's a matter for a magistrate, and that's how it should be. That's fair and reasonable. But if the underlying provision is that detention must be a last resort, well, that means that even in those situations where the offender has done something that is so egregious that it's out of step with community values, that principle overrides everything. And that's the reason why the sentences aren't reflecting the community expectations. You bet. And the Youth Justice Act will be rewritten to make sure that front and centre the rights of the victim will come ahead of the rights of the offender. And there will be detention as a last resort removed, and that is a non-negotiable. But I want to come back to, I am serious about early intervention as well. And you can be strong and deal with the hardcore repeat offenders, and you can also be compassionate and turn around the next generation before they hold a knife at somebody's throat and before they're ramming a police car. And that's what a balance looks like. And at the moment in Queensland, that balance isn't being struck. At the moment in Queensland, the government is failing at both ends of the spectrum. They're failing to hold the ones accountable who are terrorising the streets and ripping the soul out of communities, and they're failing to turn around the next generation, the pipeline that are coming through. To hear how important it is to the community, I think that's important. When the Mayor expresses to me the frustration about what it's doing to Townsville, I listen. Remember, often when you sit down with councils, and I did so this morning in Moreton Bay, things like infrastructure and depreciation schedules and local government grants and subsidies, they're front and centre. And we had a good discussion about some of those matters too. But when youth crime will dominate a conversation from a council, you know that it means a lot to the city. And I do want to thank the Mayor for her time. Yeah. About some of the challenges when it comes to housing and some of the lack of accountability in that space. Some of the things that she'd like to see when it comes to police numbers. Now, I certainly won't go into everything that we discussed. That wouldn't be fair on her. But it was a good meeting, and it was a meeting that showed how much youth crime means to this city. And I'm here because it's important to Townsville, and it's important to me. And I want Queenslanders to know that there is a better way, and we do have the right priorities for them. And making our community safer, that's front to end centre.
What are you doing while you are here?
Going to meet some service providers, going to meet some local police, Natalie's got some victims that we'll be meeting as well. Good meeting with the council, and I want the community to know that we're serious about this, and I want the community to know that this can't continue, and it won't continue. And this, I would like to think that if the government can stop being consumed by itself and focus on the things that matter to people, we might see some of these changes in the next year. But if they haven't, you can bet your bottom dollar it'll be the first item on the agenda if we form government.
Why do you say the government's consumed by itself?
You'd need a lot of time for me to go through the events of the last fortnight, but the government's consumed by itself because instead of doing the job that ministers have, they are undermining to do the job that they want, and no one wins when that's the case. And I wanted Queenslanders to know that I am serious about the things that they're telling me are important to them. This morning I saw people living in tents in Moreton Bay. Here in Townsville you've got a city under siege by youth crime. To the north of us there's a cyclone threatening the coast, and the government is talking about themselves and undermining themselves. It defies any form of logic. And while they're consumed by themselves, no one in the state government is listening to Queenslanders, and no one is running the state. And we want Queenslanders to know we are serious about them and we're listening to their priorities.
Whoever comes in next for the state, what do you hope that they will look at issues-wise in Queensland?
Well, let's not forget that these three candidates that are putting their hand up to become our next Premier have been sitting around that cabinet table for several years. So it's only fair that Queenslanders will be looking on with great interest about any commitments that they might make going forward in terms of this space. But in North Queensland we want this crime issue first and foremost to be addressed. We want to make sure that we're getting our fair share of the pie. We've always asked for that. Infrastructure spending, addressing cost of living. Just today, in this community, I've been contacted by a resident whose insurance has increased by 1/3 for their motor vehicle. There's companies out there now that won't insure motor vehicles in this community. For the period ending in October, 1,600 motor vehicles stolen in this city. And those residents out there, those vehicle owners, know all too well what I'm talking about. When you drive around the streets and you see the burnt out shells, when you drive over the bridges and you see these stolen vehicles submerged in the river, that's in your face every single day. We want this new incoming Premier to deliver for North Queensland and not forget about the regions or the bush. Because we have a right, as our south-east cousins, to our fair share of the pie, and I always maintain that.
Was the Premier quite good for the region, or was she bad?
Well, look, the Premier will be judged on her legacy. As time goes on, Queenslanders will decide whether the Premier's delivered for this state or not. But I'm a very passionate North Queenslander, and I will always fight for North Queensland and our fair share. And when things like this youth crime epidemic grip this city, then I expect action, and I expect this government to step up to the plate and deliver.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.